We have recently spent an inordinate amount of time discussing what Russia might be capable of doing if it drifts westward. What we have not spent as much time discussing is what is happening inside of Russia, and how it might affect what will happen to Ukraine. So, today, on the Geopolitics Helpline, an examination of whether Russia is teetering on the edge. You have mentioned how you dislike the Putin is done genre of YouTube videos. Well, if I may stop you right there. 1. You've got to put Putin is done in all caps and say it like such. Putin is done. And 2. The very fact that this is a genre of videos is problematic. But let's continue. What is your opinion of videos like This is the Breaking Point for Russia, where they basically say that Russia cannot sustain this war, and that it will lead to either its collapse, like the Soviet Union, or at the very least drain itself to such an extent where they physically and economically cannot continue to wage this war? Do you think this is just another Putin is done style of video for clicks, or do you think there is some legitimacy to those claims? I think this provides a good opportunity to revisit where the Russia-Ukraine war currently is, given how Iran has distracted the world for the last 2 months. But to start with a short answer to that question, yeah, this is still just chasing clicks. The genre takes kernels of truth and then interprets them in the most optimistic manner possible, without appropriately assessing the likelihood of those outcomes. And yeah, it is for clicks. Because it works. They get clicks. So I understand why the genre exists, even if I think it is not healthy for political discourse. It probably does not help that that type of commentary tends to come from people who describe themselves as geopolitics experts. I get frustrated with the mainstream media's lack of proficiency on some security topics, but they understand the importance of not making claims that extrapolate past the evidence. Unconstrained experts on social media either do not or do not care, and the fact that they are experts then lends credence to their arguments. It is a classic appeal to authority fallacy. But again, it works and it gets clicks. Rather than be a load of Western negativity, let me start with the good news for Ukraine. Russia's air defenses are in a complete state of disrepair. In fact, it is tempting to say that Russia has no air defenses, but that is not true. Ukraine fires a ton of drones with each wave, and only a handful make it to their final destination. But it only takes a handful to continuously put Russian refineries or ports out of service. I think this is something worth keeping in mind in case of a possible conflict against NATO. Ukraine has done this with relatively low-tech one-way drones. Imagine how Russian air defenses, never mind infrastructure, would melt away if the good stuff went to work. Meanwhile, we are not going to get accurate data on the macroeconomic picture in Russia. But you do not have to be Jerome Powell to understand that a series of uncontrolled fires torching valuable energy infrastructure is going to do a number on the country's budget. When you recruit troops with voluntary contracts, you cannot simply replace your losses with new soldiers. Everyone who was willing to go for a given wage has already signed up, and there are not enough newly turned 18-year-olds to reach an equilibrium. You have to increase wages and further drag people away from the productive economy. We also do not know what the Russian equipment picture is, but the signals there do not seem good for the Kremlin either. This year's Victory Day parade will be sans the heavy stuff. This is to no end disappointing for me, as it is a reliable way to increase my library of B-roll. But to the point, either Russia does not have the equipment to spare, or the military is afraid to parade it around in a location that Ukraine knows about in advance. And if it is the latter, perhaps that is a sign that maybe you should not be attending the festivities. Perhaps that is why the number of attendees for the main Red Square parade will be in the hundreds this year, rather than the thousands. This is starting to have an effect on regime security, too. Russia has been under significant internet outages for a couple of months now. That is exactly the type of thing that you do if you believe you need to prevent people from coordinating on protests. These headlines have gotten lost in the hoopla surrounding higher gas prices, which allows Russia to make more money per barrel, albeit while Russia is producing fewer barrels. It is unclear which way the net effect runs, but clearly Ukraine is relieved that the rest of the signs are trending its way to compensate. We can see the accumulation of these results on the battlefield. In March, Ukraine went on the offensive, reclaiming 34 square kilometers of territory. This was its first monthly gain outside of Kursk since October 2023. At the time, it was easy to dismiss as a one-off due to Russian Starlink terminals getting shut down. But that has continued into April, with an unfinalized Ukrainian gain of 67 square kilometers. Again, these are all good signs for Ukraine. They are further reason why Kyiv is not about to concede large swaths of land to Russia, and no one can force Zelensky to do so. If those were the reports, which is exactly how responsible media outlets indeed report on the situation, then I would have no issue here. Where things go off the rails is extrapolating from there that Putin is done, or Russia is broken. Now, let me make one point clear. When governments fall, they can fall rapidly. Everything may look fine on the streets one week, and the leader may be in exile or worse the following week. So, yes, Putin could actually be done. But any statements to that effect need to come with the appropriate caveat that those probabilities are low. And if Putin does eventually fall, the Putin is done cohort cannot celebrate their correct prediction. You cannot say for years that Putin is done and pretend to be some oracle when he finally is. A broken clock is right twice a day. Let's put this in the proper context, first by examining a strategic reality, and then drawing a key comparison. The presumption is that Russia's economic decline will force the Kremlin to retreat, having lost the ability to sustain the fight any longer. This commits the fallacy of treating the war decision as a binary variable. The Kremlin will indeed have to cut back, but there is no indication that Russia will suddenly drop military spending in Ukraine to zero. Putting back up the territorial exchange figures, these numbers are indeed encouraging. However, the main way that Russia will reduce spending is not by leaving the country. Rather, it will take its foot off the accelerator and reallocate its resources to defenses along the front line. After all, it takes far fewer resources to hold a position than it does to push forward. At the current rate, it would take Ukraine about 13 years to regain all of the territory lost since Russia began its current, and perhaps recently ended, offensive. It would be closer to a half-century before we return to the January 2022 borders. So, to be blunt, something would have to fundamentally change, something beyond what is already baked into the system, for real progress to happen here. As for the key comparison, the prevailing internet sentiment is that the United States has no hope of defeating Iran in what started as a kinetic war, but has since shifted to an economic war. Cutting through the hot social media takes, one result of the war of various forms is that Iran is in an absolute economic mess. The Iranian rial is hitting humorous lows, which is how I ended up with this humorous search query telling me that 1 Iranian rial equals 0.00 USD. More precisely, the liquid exchange market has 1.8 million rials buying a single US dollar. Iran's inflation rate for March was 53.7%. Yet still, the internet masses are confident that the regime will survive. What was Russia's inflation rate for March? Probably about 5.9%, with again the caveat that Russian macroeconomics is opaque. 5.9% is elevated, but not wholly ridiculous for a non-Western country. You cannot simultaneously hold the position that Russia is broken and Iran will survive, when Iran's inflation rate is almost 10 times larger than Russia's. And I get that there are some significant differences between the resolve of the two regimes, but that type of resolve will not magically wipe away the differences in a 10x inflation rate. Not when the main constraint here is an uprising. Not when there have recently been significant active protests in Iran, but not Russia. Not when Russian industrial capacity survives, but Iran's is effectively non-existent. Not when the United States can bomb Iran at will, but Ukraine is limited to hitting Russia with one-way attack drones. Now, I am not trying to forecast the imminent fall of the Iranian mullahs, but the inconsistency here is bizarre to witness. It exists because clicks are valuable, and telling people what they want to hear is easier than telling them the hard geopolitical realities we live in. The problem is that hopes and dreams do not translate to good public policy. Confronting the reality of the situation is necessary if you want to adopt the appropriate response. Put yourself in the shoes of Joe Midwesterner, a regular old American who cares about international affairs, but also worries about reining in government costs. What happens when he hears the "Putin is done" / "Russia is broken" framing? He does not like Russia having invaded Ukraine, so he is probably happy about hearing the news. But he also has to lend political support to the policies that the United States government adopts. And remember, he has concerns about government spending. So what is he supposed to think here? If Putin is done and Russia is broken, then the mission will soon be accomplished based on the status quo. No need to further invest in the situation. It would just be a waste of his valuable US taxpayer dollars. What if instead he hears about the more nuanced reality of the situation? That Russia is struggling but is still capable of holding on. Well, now he must confront an actual trade-off. And this time, there is a real return on investment. More aid to Ukraine does not seem like a waste of money. Russia is reeling, but Ukraine needs more help to take advantage of the situation. Returning to February 2022 borders may still be infeasible, but the West can still do better than leave Ukraine with its de facto borders looking like this. I have one other anecdote worth discussing in this vein. If you remember back to February 2025, there was significant controversy when Pete Hegseth visited the NATO headquarters for a defense ministerial meeting. In his opening remarks, Hegseth said, "We must start by recognizing that returning to Ukraine's pre-2014 borders is an unrealistic objective. Chasing this illusionary goal will only prolong the war and cause more suffering." As became clear in the following weeks, this was the first step in the Trump administration's broader effort to shift US policy on Ukraine. The United States now wanted to prioritize a settlement. The distributional consequences were less of a priority. Meanwhile, both European leaders and the prevailing online sentiment criticized Hegseth's comments. But there was a significant disconnect between the thought processes there. Within social media spheres, Hegseth was lambasted for suggesting that Ukraine's borders could change at all, whether we were talking about 2014 or 2022. He was flat wrong, and we should not listen to him. Well, that expectation was a product of the "Putin is done" rhetoric. Because the only plausible way for Ukraine to capture all of that land is for there to be a major political crisis inside of Russia. I am not just talking about Putin being removed from power, because no Russian who wants to be president for more than a day would think about withdrawing from Ukraine. Rather, there would need to be enough domestic upheaval that the troops must come home and take part in a Russian civil war. Essentially, you would need a repeat of World War I. Is that possible? Yes. Is it inevitable, as the "Putin is done" mantra indicates? Absolutely not. Back at NATO HQ, European leaders were upset that Hegseth's comments broke from a united political front. They thought his assessment was correct, absent that very unlikely contingency, but that it was a bad bargaining move to concede this point to Russia. It will likely take years to sort out whether Europe's strategic criticism was the right one. But setting aside the Trump administration's goals for the speech, it is unclear to me whether Europe's position was the right one for people who want Ukraine to get back as much land as it can. Again, the memes that "Putin is done" / "Russia is finished" are good for garnering clicks among those who already support Ukraine. But they are not good for winning over the undecided folks. What are they supposed to think after hearing those claims for the last 2 years, only for the war to continue in Ukraine, and for Russia to continue to make territorial gains, at least up until 2 months ago? It makes the entire movement look bad, and it undermines political support for Ukraine, at a time that there are real returns that could be had on an investment there. It has also created a toxic social media atmosphere. Go ahead and look below this video. I have no doubt that you will find someone who says that I'm clueless, Putin is, indeed, done, and that I should delete my video because I am such an embarrassment to society. That is not healthy debate, and it is in fact counterproductive for Ukraine's long-term security. Geez, the point of these geopolitical helpline videos was to have something shorter to produce. But here we are, running longer than the length of my average video on my main channel. I guess this one just had a lot to cover. But you can reacquaint yourself with the start of the conflict by reading one of these two excellent books about the war. Check the video description for more information about them. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you next time. Take care.